Hey everyone, it's been a while since I've gone through and recorded a full tour of the garden, so I thought I'd go through today and talk about what we're growing and talk a little bit about what we're going to be growing and just give you an update on where things are going. So if you haven't been introduced to us yet, my name is Dell, and my wife Carrie and I decided 2 years ago now that we were going to start growing most of our own food for our family of 6. And we started with a couple of beds and we grew, and eventually it got to where it took over pretty much our entire backyard. So I'm going to go through and show a tour. The reason why I do all of this is just to help show that it is possible to grow your own food. It's not extremely difficult, and it can be done on a budget, and it has changed our lives. We've noticed a dramatic increase in our health and just how we feel, and mental health, and all sorts of things. So anyway, here we go. Alright, so as we walk into the garden, we've got the kids' flower garden here with the volunteer tomato coming up. We still need to clean this out and put some new stuff in there. So I've got strawberries in through here. Strawberry plants aren't doing much right now. I got a little too hot for them. And I interplanted some beans and some peppers throughout, mostly just because I had extras. The volunteer catnip that I let go because it would help bring in bees. So I figured if I left one in here, then it would help pollinate some of the strawberries. Over here, I have lavender, southern peas. This is where I had my garlic planted that I harvested in June, and then I followed it with southern peas. And then there's a volunteer cantaloupe plant over here that I've let go. And these aren't near as sweet as the ones from last year, and I think that's because this was a hybrid seed, so the volunteer was a hybrid, and you just never know what's going to happen with those. So I probably won't let a volunteer go again on anything that I think I might eat. I'll probably just pull it up and plant something else in its place. But normally, I mean, I told myself last year I wasn't going to have vining crops out in the middle of the garden like this because you could see what happens. It just takes over the pathways, but I just can't resist the volunteer plants. I tend to let them go just so I can learn from them. Over here is the smart pots area that's shaded from the shade cloth in the afternoon. I have a video that talks about that, and I'll link to it down in the description. And I'll go over there in a moment and show those. I'll come back over here to the kids' garden now. Okay, so this is the bed that Brooklyn just planted last week, and we posted a video showing all about how we planted this. Actually, Brooklyn did all the planting on it. It's full of beans, carrots, and chives. Those are all three things that she likes to eat and she likes to cook with. So, and I think they're things that are going to do really well for her. So go check out that video to see how we got this area planted. It's starting to rain. It's been such a weird August. We've had so much extra rain. I'm not complaining. This has been a great thing, but just wasn't prepared for it. I would have had everything ready to go for planting sooner if I'd have known we were going to have this dramatic of a cool down in August. But it's alright, we were able to catch up. We've got most everything planted now, and I'll probably plant another round of everything to fill everything out here, and within the next week or so I'll have everything planted for the fall except for spinach. For spinach I'll wait until we get a little bit cooler, probably into September before I plant that. Although I may pick a small patch where I go ahead and try it. So this bed here is some of our summer stuff. So it had some squash in here that had to be pulled out because of squash bugs and squash vine borers. So what I did when I pulled those out was I took them directly to a 55-gallon barrel and dumped them inside of that with water and soap in it. So the soapy water drowns the bugs, and that takes out the entire population, because I know that there are eggs all over the plants as well, and I didn't want to have to go and hunt for them. So I actually see some squash bugs over on this other squash plant now, so I'll show you those so you can see what I'm talking about, and I'll need to take care of them on this. Alright, so you can see all those squash bugs there. Those just hatched. I gotta get rid of all those. So I've also got okra in this bed. I've got peppers, some beans mixed throughout. You can see one of the peppers there. This plant's called Blue Daze. Carrie liked it, so I bought it and I threw it in. but it's been pretty cool to add some color, and it's helped bring in some pollinators to this bed. This is a variegated oregano that I haven't cooked with yet. It was struggling when I first put it in, but it's really starting to do well now. So I'm going to start cooking with this and trying it out to see how I like it. Mostly I just thought it looked cool, and I like to collect herbs essentially. So I like any nursery I go to that has a variety of an herb that I've never tried. I buy it just to try it out. So from this bed here that I just showed directly to the right, I have my tomato wall. And these were the tomatoes that got the herbicide injury from the utility company spraying for these utility lines over here. They sprayed below and it drifted over into these tomatoes. So it seems like they made it through, and then they got hit with the heat. And then I've got another video that talks all about what I've learned about these tomatoes this year, so I'll link to it down in the description. But go check it out if you want to hear about everything I've learned about tomatoes and how I'm going to grow them next year. But we're pulling, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 of these off right now a day, and it's really starting to pick up. These are San Marzano tomatoes, and we mostly use tomatoes for salsa, and these are great for salsa. Over here on this other tomato wall, these tomatoes on the far end died, so I switched it out with a loofah plant and some of these yard-long beans as well, and they're doing great. I just planted them directly in the wood chip area here, and they're coming up, and they're starting to put on fruit. So from that bed over to here, and this bed, this was a bed that I tried an experiment on where I grew a cover crop in the spring, and then I planted directly within it. I didn't chop the cover crop down first, and everything in here did really well. The broccoli in here was probably my best performing broccoli. I had another one that did well on the other side, but it definitely did better than a lot of them. The onions did really well in here. This pepper plant here is looking great. Now another factor on this bed is that it does have this shade cloth here, so it's shaded in the afternoon, and that could be the difference. Although the broccoli plant was over on this side of the bed, so it wasn't until late in the day before it was shaded. We also have some bee balm that started to take over the fence here, and it's gone to flower. And we've got oregano and rosemary. And then we've got some seeds that we planted in here as well. So there's collard greens that are just starting to come up. Here's a couple right there. We planted these about a week ago. And this is Bok Choy, a Chinese cabbage that's starting to come up here. And what I do is I plant these pretty dense, and then I go through and thin them down to whatever the package says for spacing, and then we eat the thinnings. Those are the bee balm leaves there. We've got some volunteer beans that are coming up here. These just dropped down from last year, and I like to let these go so I can learn from them, because I haven't done anything to take care of this plant. It gets runoff from when I water this bed here, but other than that, I don't do anything to it. So that tells me that, you know, it tells me all sorts of things about how things grow in my yard, and if I'm watering too much and if I'm not watering enough. And I can use things like this as a baseline, because if I have plants that don't get any care from me and they do great, and the plants that do get care from me don't do so well, then that tells me that I'm doing something to mess up the process. So at that point I can start investigating and trying to figure out what it is. So I like having these plants around just to have as that baseline, so that I know if I'm doing something that isn't quite right. So from this bed that I just showed, we come over this way. This covered bed here is empty right now. Soil mix is expensive, and it's going to be a bit before I'm able to go through and fill all these, but I'm hoping to get all these raised beds filled with soil mix by the end of the year, so that we can have another round of spinach and lettuce to plant here in a couple months, because I'm going to have everything out here planted probably within the next week or so. This is another bed we have in the corner. There's pineapple sage here. This is a wall of beans that I had 2 bean poles that you can't see because they're buried. I'll post a picture of it later once these beans are done, but I had them there, and then I had this trellis just kind of sitting over here for storage, and these beans just basically took it over. They haven't produced a whole lot yet, but it's just now starting to cool down to where they're able to. You can see one right there. Beans don't produce very well once the temperatures get above 90 or 95, especially when the humidity is high. There's a bee. And that's why I like having plants like sage around here, because you can see this sage right here. But it's right up against the beans, and that sage really helps draw in the bees. So that's why I don't have to worry about any pollination issues with my plants, because I have all these herbs everywhere that pull in the bees, and then they pollinate my plants for me. I've got bush beans through here that are starting to produce. Well, it looks like some of them already gone to seed here. We've been picking beans off of here. We'll probably get quite a few more off of that. These are some peppers. I think these are some sort of hot pepper. I don't see any on the plant right now, but it's in flower, so we'll have a lot soon. These are broccoli seeds that we started. We started these on the 4th, so about 5 days ago. This back corner I haven't planted yet, but whatever I do plant, it's going to be something that doesn't require a lot of sun. Probably a lettuce, because this fence is going to start shading this area more and more as the season goes on, and eventually it's going to be completely shaded. So I want to make sure I plant something here. It's probably going to be lettuce, because it doesn't need a whole lot of sun. At least out of everything else, it needs the least. So now coming back this way, I have another one of my raised beds, and it's mostly planted. I've got some winter savory, which I still haven't figured out how to use quite yet. I've tried some recipes, I just haven't really liked how they turned out. These are some southern peas here, some peppers, and those look like the same peppers that I just showed over there, so I believe these are Anaheims. Not entirely sure though. I'll have to look it up. Another pepper plant here, more southern peas, rosemary plant, sage, cucumber. Looks like it's struggling a little bit. It's probably being attacked by some cucumber beetles, so I'll have to check that out. And there might be some squash bugs that have found it as well, because I've been taking out squash bugs a lot, so they're struggling to find food. So they'll probably turn to cucumbers by now, even though it's not their favorite, not as much as squash. Over here we have more of the pole beans that are the yard-long beans. We have oregano here, and we have thyme right there. Right here are some carrots that we started, or I think the kids all started these. There's carrots and beets and lettuce through here. And I'll link to another video that shows how we planted these, so check that out down in the description and see how we got all this stuff started. Over here I had 2 squash plants that I just pulled up. They were heavily infested with squash bugs and vine borers, and so I pulled those up and threw them into the soapy water mix as well. Over here I have tomatoes. These are another set of volunteer tomatoes, and these turned out really well. These tomatoes taste good, and they're doing great over here. I'm just kind of letting them sprawl out. This is another, like I mentioned before with the beans, I like to let things go that come up as volunteers just to learn from them. And these tomatoes are doing far better than the ones that I had trellised over there with the single stem method. Over here to the left of the tomatoes, I have a bed of sweet potatoes, and I'll link to a video that shows how I got these started, so check that out. But these are doing well. We're eating the greens and salads and burritos and stir fries. and then we'll start harvesting the tubers here, and I'll have to look up when we planted. It's going to be another at least 30 to 45 days before we start harvesting those. Over here we have blackberries. We have 3 blackberry plants through here, and I may end up building some sort of trellis for them along this fence, but I wanted to see what happened if I just kind of let them go. So those are doing well. I've got a bunch of little flowers on here. I don't know how well that shows, but those are all going to be blackberries, all these little white flowers, which Carrie's really excited about. She's excited to make a blackberry pie out of it. So that's, I guess over here I didn't show. This is one of our smart pots areas. These ones aren't looking near as good as the ones over here. I'm not 100% sure why yet. I think it may have something to do with the mulch around it. So I was trying this experiment where I had one smart pot that I piled with mulch around the sides to help insulate it, because I just didn't understand how these things would not dry out and get super hot in the heat. So I thought that would help. So I did that experiment here, and then on these smart pots over here I didn't. And you can clearly see that these smart pots, I mean, just look how much better. These peppers were planted at the same time. So this plant here, and now these are different varieties of peppers, but still you can just see the plant looks a whole lot better than the ones that aren't mulched. So I'm going to pull that mulch back and see how things go. I also think that these may have been overwatered a little bit, just because the yellowing of the leaves and the way they're wilting like that or the way that they look. Here you can see, definitely looks like it could be overwatering in me, and we've had a lot more rain than usual. So I don't know, I'm still trying to figure out what's going on with this bed. But this smart pot's bed here is doing great. So in here I've got New Zealand spinach and stevia, which if you've never tried stevia, it is definitely, check it out. So I'm a heavy iced tea drinker, and I'm trying to find a way to get completely off of sugar, and I'm hoping this will help me get there. So I'm going to harvest these leaves and run them through a dehydrator, and then run those through a coffee grinder, and then use that as a sugar substitute in my iced tea. And I'm hoping that I'll be able to get completely off of sugar, because that's really the main thing that keeps me on it, is iced tea. And here I've got jalapenos. These are Poblano peppers. We harvest quite a bit off of these. We use these a lot in our stir fries and our rices and stuff like that. Over here, more New Zealand spinach, thyme, some parsley back in here. Some more hot peppers. This is a lettuce leaf basil I really like. It does really well in the heat. And on this basil, this is at the point I need to go through and pinch off the plant, so like that. And that will encourage the plant to spur off growth from there, and it'll bush out. So I'm going to go through and pinch off the tops of all my basil. And then you can preserve these easily by washing them off and then running them through a food processor to get them into small little pieces, or you can just chop them up with a knife and then put those into the silicone ice trays, and then fill that with olive oil, and then you can take that and put it in the freezer, and what it creates is a frozen block of basil that's encapsulated in oil that you can just take out of the freezer and throw in the pan. So whenever you're making like a sauce or something like that, you can just start with that and just throw it in the pan and let it heat up, and when it melts, then you'll have your oil and you'll have your basil already. And that's how we like to use this stuff. So this is the time of year where basil really comes on strong, and will preserve enough to last us at least another year just from a couple plants. It's really prolific. So if you're buying basil in the store right now, stop. This stuff is so cheap to grow and easy to grow. It'll save you a lot of money, and it tastes a lot better too. Plus you can experiment with different varieties. There's a lot of different tasting basils, like a cinnamon basil and all sorts of different types. So here we have Junior's, no, this is Mary. Mary planted this area with lettuce seeds. So those have come up. And then here is a rosemary plant that we just recently got from Bill Ferris over at Prairie Wind Nursery. This is his favorite variety as far as taste goes. And what was the name of it? Furneaux. So I'm trying it out. And here is the Vietnamese cilantro, which has been great to have because it does well in the heat, whereas regular cilantro that we're used to doesn't. And it's not in the same family as cilantro, it just tastes like it, so that's why it's called Vietnamese cilantro. But these leaves are great to use as a cilantro replacement in salsas, and in our rice that we like to make with our poblanos, we throw that in there as well. And then here we have a hot and spicy oregano, and it definitely is a little spicy. So if you want to add, we like to add this to our black beans and to some of our dishes like that to give it a little spice. And here's some chives right here. And it looks like Mary dropped some lettuce seeds, so here's some lettuce coming up here. But it's good to know that they'll grow just right there in the wood chips. I'll probably let those go just to find out what happens. And in this bed over here, we have some stuff that's still left over from the summer. We have oregano, and those are perennials, so those will hopefully always be here as long as I take care of them in the winter and keep them covered properly. And thyme over here, more basil. We have some cilantro. It hasn't quite come up yet. It takes a little bit longer than some of this other stuff. Here's some more New Zealand spinach. And I started this New Zealand spinach a while ago. It takes a while to get going. So what I've learned from that is that next year I'm going to have my New Zealand spinach started under grow lights in probably March or so, and then in April I'll set it out and I'll have a head start on it, because this stuff's been great in the summer. Last year we didn't have any lettuce or spinach, but this year we had a lot of this New Zealand spinach and sweet potato greens and things like that. So we're still able to have our burritos and our wraps that we like to have that's packed full of that stuff. So over here is some more broccoli seeds that we started about 5 days ago. And just like the cabbage, we'll go through and thin these down to what the seed packet says once they get a little bit bigger. But we'll let them grow up, and then we'll eat the thinnings because they're super nutritious and they're nice to add to those salads and wraps as well. Over here we have some mustard greens. I've never grown them before, but I'm going to try them out. Another rosemary plant back here. Here's another basil that really needs to be pruned. It's getting way too leggy, so I'll pull it off about right here and encourage it to start branching out as well. Along this back fence are tomatoes that are planted in smart pots on the other side. And then we have beans here. I don't know if you can really see any beans right now on this plant. There's some starting to develop right there. Like I said, the weather's just now turned to where it's ideal conditions for these to produce, so I expect these beans to really start producing a lot now. Another thing I wanted to talk about on these beds is I've changed the way I view how I plant things on trellises in these beds. So in the past I planted things on this side of the trellis, and now I'm going to start planting things on this side of the trellis. And the reason for that is because when they're planted on this side of the trellis, I can't build one of these PVC domes for this bed because the lid will smash the plant when it shuts. Whereas if things are planted on the outside of the bed, then they can grow up the trellis on the outside, and I can still have one of those domes on this side of the bed that swings from this way and opens out that way. So that's my goal for this fall, is to build those for this bed here, and for this bed here, and hopefully for this bed here as well. But I've got to wait for some of this stuff to get off the fence from the inside first. I've got some beans that came up from the inside here, and I'll definitely have to rearrange some things in this bed to make it to where that's going to work. But I've started the process by planting on the outside in this bed for the first time. So I just dug a little trench next to the bed. I filled it with a good mix of compost and peat moss, and then I planted beans every 6 inches or so, I guess about every foot, and then covered that back over with the mulch, and they're doing well. They look a little yellow. They may be getting too much water. Again, we've had a lot of rain, and everything kind of funnels down to this point because it's a low point. So I may end up having to build this area up so that it drains a lot better, and things planted here next to it don't get quite so waterlogged. That's what I had to do over here in this area, where I'm also growing on the outside of the bed. And I started some scarlet runner beans last week here. But when I built this initially, it was a lot lower. I just built this up again, and I'm hoping it's going to drain a lot better now. And I may have to back off on how long I water these beds, because up until now I've just run it until it's overflowed. I haven't really cared too much how much it overflows, but I'll probably start paying attention to that so that I don't get too much runoff coming down into these. And something else I'm trying is just planting in smart pots on this side, so I don't have room on that bed over there to try smart pots, but here I have this extra room. So I'm planting in smart pots and letting them trellis up the fence. So there's nothing planted in that yet. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to plant in there yet. I'm still trying to figure that out. This is a tomato here. This is a tomato that I transplanted from a cutting off of one of my plants from over there. So on the other side where that tomato wall is. So I cut the plant, I cut this stem off, and then I put it in water for about a week or so to develop some roots, and then I put it in this smart pot. So so far I've never really had great success with this in the past, but this one I really took some care to make sure I did everything right, and I changed out the water and kept the plant happy while it was rooted, or while it was rooting. So anyway, we'll see how that goes. Over here I have another tomato plant that was attacked by spider mites in another location. I moved it over here, and it's getting more shade, and it's starting to come back, so it's starting to vine up here as well. And then again, these are those beans that I showed, and here's some of those. I'm moving over here now. I have another area that's shaded in the afternoon, so I plant a lot of lettuces and spinaches and things like that over in this area. So I haven't seeded anything in this bed yet, but I'll probably plant a bunch of lettuce in here. And then I'm going to plant some beans next to that little trellis, makeshift trellis that I threw together just from an old shelf. I'm going to try that out. And then we have a pepper plant. And this pepper hasn't produced very well, and I think it's because it doesn't get as much sun as the ones that are out in full sun. So although the green looks great on it and it looks super healthy, it's not producing. So we'll see what happens with it. I'm going to let it go and see what I learn from it. I've got another pepper plant over here that gets a little more sun, but it's not producing either. So in through here, I have chard that I just seeded. Some pole beans here that are growing up this bamboo. I just kind of stuck on the ground. Over here was my Three Sisters area, and this corn did not do well. It got eaten up with bugs pretty bad, and I think I'm pretty much done growing corn. It's just not super space efficient or cost efficient. It's really cheap to buy, and it just has a lot of pests to deal with, and I just don't have a lot of room for it. So I may have a small patch of it just for the kids, just for the novelty of it, but I don't think I'm going to grow any more to eat. It's just not worth the space. So in through here now I have southern peas that are planted all throughout, and I just kind of threw them around and buried them with some compost. I didn't do much other than that. Then along the back row I have comfrey. Comfrey is a plant that sends its roots way down where a lot of other plants can't get to, and it pulls the nutrients up from there and it puts them in their leaves. And then what you can do is you can take those leaves and use them in the compost. You can use them as mulch and things like that, and then as they break down, they release the nutrients from those leaves back into the soil. So it's a way that we can get away without having to use any chemical fertilizers, is by relying on natural processes like this. And that's why we make our own compost, and that's why we have a rabbit. That's why we have all that kind of stuff, so that we don't have to use any chemical fertilizer. Alright, so over here I have my compost bins, and this is the compost that's been going since last fall. Made out of a bunch of pumpkins left over from a neighborhood display that were donated, and coffee grounds and wood chips and all sorts of stuff like that. And now it's got corn and other stuff that we pulled and plant scraps, and what we do is we filter it down into this level. So this bin here is always compost that's ready to go, and you can see I am out of compost, so hopefully I can get this stuff going here soon and get a lot more material to get another batch going. Over here I have two of my containers that I did a terrible job taking care of. I am just so bad with these plastic containers because they dry out so fast, and I'm really a big believer in those smart pots because they just don't dry out near as fast as these plastic containers do. But these were attacked by spider mites pretty heavily and were almost dead, and I got them back, and now this branch here is doing pretty well, so I think I'll still get some tomatoes off of it. I've got one tomato there, but I think with these containers I'm going to make sure I only have them around the porch in places that I am all the time, so that they get plenty of water because I'll see them all the time, and just stick to having smart pots out here. And then this bed here runs along the side of the house, so it gets shade in the afternoon as well. And I've got cilantro coming up here, and kale that was planted early in the year that's still hanging on. And then in the winter, so we're not eating much of this kale right now because it's super bitter when it gets hot, but as it starts to cool down we'll start eating it because it'll sweeten up. The plant's response to cold is to produce more sugar, so it makes it taste sweeter. Here we've got a volunteer tomato. It's got a bunch of flowers on it, so hopefully it'll start spitting out fruit here soon. This is a cage that one of my buddies gave me, and I think I'm going to start using these from now on. I got some wire that I'm going to use to build a lot more of these. And again, I mentioned all of this about how I'm going to do tomatoes different in another video that I shot that's all about what I learned about tomatoes this year. So check that out down in the description if you want to see about that. Here's another volunteer tomato coming up here. And then lastly, I have these two raised beds on legs that are covered with insect netting. And I've got cilantro in this one. And I'm probably going to plant some broccoli just right here in the middle of this bed, because then that'll give it enough room that I can still shut this. And eventually, once it gets cold enough, I'll put another layer on this. I'll build another one of these frames that goes on the outside and goes over, and it'll have the clear plastic on it, the PVC film or whatever it's called, and that'll help keep the temperature up in this bed as well. So it'll have two layers. It'll have the plastic layer on the outside, and then on the inside we'll have this insect netting. And then on this bed here we have lettuce and cabbage. I think that's mostly it through here. And I did cabbage different than I did last year. Last year I bought transplants, and then I transplanted them every 18 inches, and all that space around the plant was wasted for a while until the plant grew up. Well, now what I'm doing is I'm throwing a whole bunch of seeds out, and then I'm going to go through and thin them down to one every 18 inches and eat the thinnings. So I'm able to use that space that would otherwise be wasted for 2 months or until the plant gets large enough to take up that amount of space.